Transcendence does not exist, but we should always strive toward it as if it did. What's the point of striving towards something that does not exist, you might ask? Well, it's an ideal state, and if we strive toward it, we'll still get closer to such an ideal state than we would if we didn't care about it at all. We come closer to what would be transcendence than would otherwise be the case. Such striving allows us to be as transcendent as it is possible to be. Now, this will actually be the most personal mini-lecture I've ever given, because it takes its origin in some thoughts I had after the death of my brother, Baltzar Beckeld. Those of you familiar with my Western self-contempt may recall that I dedicated that book to him. My brother and only sibling was only 42 when he died, and he had been healthy, practicing CrossFit and so on, when suddenly pancreatic cancer struck, one of the most aggressive cancers, and killed him within a couple of months, which was, of course, an enormous shock to all of us. Since we had grown up with an absent father, and he was the older one, in addition to being my brother, he had also been the only father figure and male role model I ever had. And to boot, he was my best friend and had even been my housemate for a few years when he became sick. So when he died in my and our mother's arms, it's fair to say that I lost almost everything that was precious to me. And this, as you can imagine, led a philosopher like me into a number of thoughts in between the crying and the screaming. And some of those thoughts I want to share with you now, because today, November 15th, is in fact my brother's birthday. He would have been 50 today. So when I say that transcendence does not exist, what I mean is that transcendence is a religious concept and must therefore be denied by those who do not subscribe to a metaphysically religious worldview. That is, by those who think that the physical world is the only world we have. But this does not mean that transcendence, or the idea of transcendence, should be discarded so lightly. Transcendence, etymologically, means to climb beyond or across, from Latin trans and scandere. In theology or scholastic philosophy, transcendence usually is an attribute of God because he exists outside of the material world as opposed to being immanent in it. And for a human being to be transcendent, he must go beyond himself. He must leave himself behind. That is, a transcendent journey in religion is to approach God, to love him so as to rise toward communion with him beyond his own petty desires and concerns. And it's the ability to envision him beyond the limits of the empirical. This idea of going beyond the limits of the empirical then became important in Kant's transcendental philosophy, in his critique of pure reason. But here I'm not concerned with epistemology, which is Kant's concern, but with love. So, anyway, that's God. But what about transcendence among human beings? What does transcendence mean in the context of love toward other humans? So to discuss that, we first have to mention the idea of the pleasure principle, the Lustprinzip of German psychology and psychoanalysis, which was discussed by such men as Gustav Fechner and Sigmund Freud. Basically, the pleasure principle is that we always strive toward pleasure in some form. That pleasure is an inherent motivation in what we do. Perhaps not the only motivation, but certainly one of them. It appears impossible to escape the pleasure principle, not just when we seek pleasure, but even when we commit so-called selfless acts, because even in this case, we derive pleasure from knowing that we have committed a selfless act, from knowing that we have done a good deed or acted righteously. So it would seem that we can never get away from the fact that our own well-being is always involved in what we do in some way, including when we love others and, quote-unquote, selflessly seek their pleasure and their well-being. But the process of mourning helped me to, if not fully abandon the pleasure principle, then at least to move further away from it than would have been possible under normal circumstances. You sometimes hear people say that you should snap out of sorrow or mourning because you're really mourning for yourself or for your own sake because of what you have lost. And of course there is some truth to that. But I believe that people who say this haven't moved sufficiently close to transcendence, because there can be another element to mourning as well. So yes, part of my mourning was my missing my brother, wanting to hug him, laugh with him, go to the opera with him, work out with him, share a meal with him, and do any of the myriad things we used to do. But that wasn't all. I realized that part of my mourning was also over him for his own sake. I was crying over the fact that he will never again listen to a symphony of Beethoven. I was crying over the fact that he will never again make love to a woman. I was crying over the fact that he will never again engage in his craft as an actor, which he loved so much. That is, I was genuinely crying for him over what he had lost by dying, and not simply over what I had lost by his death. Perhaps a bit similar was the fact that while the rest of us were crying very often during the month from the diagnosis to his death, my brother himself only cried one single time. He accepted right away his own impending death. The one time he did cry was shortly after we received the news that he was going to die. But he didn't cry because of death, which again he took with equanimity, but because I broke down and cried upon the news. So he wasn't crying because he was going to die, but because his baby brother was crying. And this is how to move beyond the pleasure principle in relation to other human beings. To return to my own mourning process, I don't simply mourn the fact that I will not be able to give him gifts or do things for him and therefore receive pleasure from that, but I mourn the fact that he will never experience certain things even when I myself am completely unrelated to those things and would not derive any pleasure from them, perhaps not even be aware of them. And that is when we begin to approach transcendence, that is, a proper going beyond ourselves. Paradoxically, such an approach toward transcendence might be easier to achieve within the materialistic worldview I mentioned in the beginning, because in such a worldview, there is a sense that the dead have genuinely lost something, everything really, by dying, since there's no expectation that they are now in paradise. This is part of the reason why even strong and manly Homeric heroes weep, almost like children, over their loved ones, because the sense of loss on all sides is final and complete. But so while we can never achieve literal transcendence, we are stuck inside our own bodies and our own emotions, so to speak, we can still move closer to what transcendence would be if it were possible. And that, in turn, will make us better, more loving human beings. We can train ourselves to think and act in this way, even when, hopefully, we are not in mourning. And that will make it easier for us to one day, if necessary, sacrifice ourselves for those we love, for our families and our civilizations. So, this has been very personal. So, if you've listened all the way to the end, I appreciate it all the more. Thank you.